From the government, Mark Harper was appointed Transport Secretary by the new Prime Minister Rishi Sunak just 2 weeks ago. He was previously a leadership candidate in the party's 2019 contest, of course won by Boris Johnson. For Labour, we have Emily Thornberry. She was Shadow Foreign Secretary for 4 years before running unsuccessfully for party leader in 2020. She now shadows the Attorney General, who is effectively the government's in-house lawyer. Head of Economics and Politics at media giant Bloomberg is Stephanie Flanders. In a previous life, she was economics editor for the BBC, a former colleague of mine, and worked as a chief market strategist in the private sector with JP Morgan, Chase & Co. She cheers herself up at weekends by supporting QPR. Caroline Lucas. Not normally very cheery. Caroline Lucas is the first and only Green Party member to be elected to the House of Commons. She's been MP for Brighton for 12 years. She's had 2 stints leading the party, standing down most recently in 2018. And our 5th panellist is the businessman and former TV dragon, Theo Paphitis. After moving from Cyprus to the UK as a child, he left school to be T-boy at a city insurance broker. He's since become one of the country's most successful retail entrepreneurs. Welcome. Welcome to our panel, welcome to our audience here in Wales. Very good to see you, and of course, welcome to you at home. Do join in the conversation the usual way on social media at BBC Question Time. Let's hear what you've got to say. And a reminder as well as being on BBC One after 10 o'clock news, as usual, we are also live on the iPlayer at 8 o'clock, so you can catch us at both places. Right, should we have our first question, which comes from Emily Merrick.
Are nurses justified in taking industrial action?
What do you think, Emily?
I think they definitely deserve a pay rise, and I think it's a shame it's come to them taking that decision.
Now, more of you asked this question than any other single question this evening, which is why we're starting on it. Theo, do you want to kick us off?
Well, I hope it doesn't come to it. We rely on our nurses, rely on our doctors, and it's sad that between the government and the nurses' union, they can't find a way in which we don't get to a situation where essential services are withdrawn and people's lives are at stake.
So just to be clear, what the nurses... This is the first time the RCN has called a strike across the United Kingdom in its history. I think it's 106 years. And what the nurses are asking for is a pay rise of 17.6%.
Right, they know that's not sustainable, and they know they're not going to get that, and that's not possible because we are into a very, very difficult economic recession. And if we indemnify everybody against inflation, then there's no recession. You know, it's just going to spiral. So that's not realistic. But what
do you think would be realistic then?
What also is not realistic is that we take people who have vocational careers and look after us for granted. And I'm afraid to say we have done that for too long. So the nurses, I don't like to pick on special cases, but certainly when you look at the facts, nurses do require some special treatment. And it's not right that the government just takes for granted people who give their lives and their careers to help us and take them for granted.
Well, you're saying that 17.6% is unreasonable. Inflation is running at about 10%. It may well go higher. What do you think would be reasonable?
Well, the private sector's not getting anything like that. So we know the average pay rise is about 5.5%. So it's not right, really, that they're going to get 17%. But it's all at the same time trying to make up for lost income over the past 3 years is also not very realistic. But there's something in the middle has to be found that allows them to get up to a level which is allows them to keep body and soul together, pay the bills at the supermarket, put roofs over their heads and light and heat, which is not unreasonable.
Mark?
So, the direct answer to Emily's question is strike action justified? No, I don't think it is. And picking up what Theo said there about taking nurses for example, the government absolutely hasn't done that, actually, because last year, for example, when most public sector workers didn't get a pay rise, we specifically made sure that nurses did get a pay rise of 3%. And what we've done is for those that don't know,
1% the year before.
There's a pay review body which takes evidence from the government, from all the unions, which makes recommendations. We've accepted all of those recommendations in full for the NHS, And I think, as you said, the 17.6% demand is simply not realistic. That would cost £9,000 million if it was delivered in the NHS. And we're in a very difficult position because of the rise in energy prices triggered by Putin's war, the recovery from the pandemic, and you've got to balance these things. So I think what the government's trying to do is deliver a fair rise by accepting the pay review bodies, but you cannot deliver a 17.6% pay rise. And the final thing I'd say is I do hope, picking up your point, Theo, that the unions and the employers can talk together and come up with something that both sides can live with, because I think it's always a failure when you end up with industrial action, and I hope that can be headed off at this stage.
Man at the back. Yes, you.
Yes, I appreciate that pay is a major concern, and that appears to be driving the strike ballots and the action. But I think the concern is far wider than that. It's often misunderstood that NHS staff or NHS patients themselves, they work in often frontline positions and a whole range of roles, but they themselves experience the difficulties of a poorly funded system. They're not immune to it. And I think in many ways, and the Conservative Party, the current Prime Minister of this month, has not reassured me in any way that there's going to be some meaningful addressing of the primary lack in the treatment of NHS staff, not just since the pandemic back in March or February of 2020, but for many years before that. There's been 12 years of attritional damage to the NHS. I see in some other parties some very encouraging phrasing and compassionate politics, including Caroline's party. I can see that the Green Party appeared to not just deal with environmental issues, they look at the NHS as being a vital driver of the well-being of the nation. I support 100% that the nurses to take action if that's their last resort. And I think they've been in the last resort for many, many years. And I think this...
Okay. So now, do you work for the NHS?
I do. I'm not a nurse, but I do work for them.
Right.
I support, I see and admire firsthand the whole range of professionals who work in NHS.
Have we got any other NHS workers here in the audience? Yes, you, in the front. What's your view?
I agree with the gentleman. I think as a last resort, as an ex-nurse, the last resort...
You're an ex-nurse, are you?
Yes.
Right.
Should be strike action. I don't believe now, at this stage, or the talking that went on before, it made any difference. And unfortunately, this is a last resort, so that the government realise that nurses are serious. The NHS is serious now, and do something about it.
And do you think the 17% demand or request, however you want to put it, in terms of a pay rise is fair?
I don't think it's unreasonable. I mean, I understand that it's probably high.
I mean, what they're saying, just so it's clear, is that they basically have lost 5% in terms of not getting pay rises previously. And then, of course, we've got inflation, which is predicted to go up to 12%. So that's how they're arriving at that figure.
Yes. And I don't think it's unreasonable. Had they addressed this before, the nurses' pay before, then probably it wouldn't be like this now. Okay. Nurses don't have a work-life balance. And you've got to think, and it can lead to mental health problems as well. And I think it's the whole picture. It's not just the pay, but the whole picture.
Okay, Emily.
Yeah.
I think the conversations that are going on between nurses and NHS providers are kind of similar to the conversations that are happening in the public sector and in the private sector up and down the country with this inflation rate. And it really is a question of what can be afforded and comparing that with what is absolutely necessary. And we all know that nurses have been underpaid for far too long, and we know that they are desperate, and we know that they have been pushed to an extreme. We also know that actually, and it's a good thing, and I'm pleased to see the Conservative government are doing it, they're talking to the nurses, which is new, because the nurses have not been speaking to any Secretaries of State since Sajid Javid, who I think was about 3 or 4 Secretaries of State before. So at least there are conversations going on. Now, I don't know where it's going to land in the end. I don't know whether the 17.5% is really exactly what the nurses want or if it's an opening offer.
And
I don't know how much...
Would Labour support it?
What we would say is we don't know what the flexibilities are within that negotiation. I don't think anybody sitting around this table knows what room there is for negotiation. I'm just pleased to hear that there is negotiation going on, and we need to make sure that a settlement is agreed which is fair. But I am struck by the fact that the nurses are going on strike when they have never been on strike before. I have to also say...
Do you support them going on strike?
Well, during the time when we were in charge of the NHS, we didn't have a single strike in the NHS. I mean, we didn't have strikes.
But do you support them going on strike now?
I don't think that they should be going on strike. I don't think they want to go on strike. I don't think patients want them to go on strike. What we need to do is find a settlement. And it isn't just, as is being hinted here, it isn't just a question of pay. It's also a chronic lack of staff. It's 7 million people on a waiting list. You know, we need to have more people coming into the NHS, and we need to have a plan. We, in Labour, have a plan for vastly increasing, the biggest increase in staff in the National Health Service. That's the sort of thing that we need in order to refresh the staff. The cavalry needs to cut. I'm sorry?
The Shadow Health Secretary said he wouldn't pay a 17.6% pay rise either. He said it was unaffordable.
So the payment for the increase in staff, we've made clear how we will pay for that, and we have a detailed plan as to how we will vastly increase the number of nurses, midwives, health visitors, doubling the number of places of doctors, because we cannot carry on as we are.
But just to be clear, the government doesn't support the request for 17.6%, and neither does Labour.
No, what we're saying is that there needs to be a negotiation, and a settlement can be found so long as there is goodwill on both sides and so long as it is appreciated just how important the nurses are. Well, you say this is what the...
Well, I listened to him being interviewed. He said something different to you.
But what is... No, he's not. What we're saying is that it is a good thing that at last the Conservative government are not playing games with this. I mean, quite frankly, you know, you look at the way the Conservatives were playing games with the transport industries over the summer. At least they're not doing that now. Okay. At least they are talking to them. And at least they're not...
I'm the Transport Secretary.
I know, and good for you. And I'm glad to hear it, because there's a difference in tone and a difference in attitude with this government that you don't need to make silly party points, because it is very important that we all find a solution to this in these really difficult times.
All right, let's hear some more from our audience. Yes, the man there in the blue shirt.
Thank you. I don't believe anyone should have an above-inflation pay rise. However, there is a genuine need for a fair and reasonable offer in this matter. I have two daughters that are at university. One's studying to be a doctor, the other's studying to be a nurse. And amongst them and their peers, there's genuine concern about recruitment and retention, that people are not coming through for these careers, and certainly not of the calibre that we would want.
The woman at the back in the red top.
I would agree that morale is at its worst ever in the NHS, whether it's on the front line or people who are working strategically and supporting those people working on the front line.
Are you saying that's someone from inside the NHS?
Yes.
What do you do?
I'm the diagnostic workforce lead for the South West.
Right, OK.
And people are exhausted.
They are.
Right. Well, let's hear from them.
So I understand that we had a 3% pay rise this year, but it was unfunded, so cuts have been made in other places. Whatever pay rise is offered needs to be new money. It can't just be taking from another purse just to pay someone else.
I've spoken to nurses in my constituency, and I know that they've not come to this decision lightly. And these are people, remember, for whom nursing, for whom looking after other people is their vocation. They care about other people. This is what they do. And they spend hours and hours doing it, working many hours of overtime. Through the pandemic, we stood on the doorsteps and clapped. But claps don't pay bills. And we have a situation now where nurses are using food banks because they can't make ends meet. So I think we should absolutely put the responsibility for this situation at the doors of 12 years of Tory underfunding, 12 years of understaffing, 12 years of undervaluing of our NHS and of our nurses. Because
and the question is, are they justified in going on strike?
I will stand in solidarity with them for this strike. I know that it's going to cause a lot of worry to many people across the country who have treatment that is due. And I know that they haven't done this lightly, but I want to say that I believe that the nurses that are taking action are also taking it, not just for themselves, but for the future of the NHS. What we're looking at here is an NHS so starved of resource that we have 47,000 vacancies. Imagine that. I've spoken to nurses who say how soul-destroying it is to be working on wards and not able to give the level of care that you want to do because you are trying to get around so many people because you don't have enough other support with you. That is unsafe. And so I think when nurses go on strike over this issue, they are also striking for a better funded, properly valued NHS, which is in all of our interests going forward.
And Stephanie, of course, this all comes against the backdrop of the autumn statement, or the budget, or whatever you want to call it, which we're expecting next week. And we're certainly all being softened up to the idea that there isn't going to be a lot more money.
Yeah, I think it's interesting how many people in this room seem to see an exception for the NHS and certainly for the nurses and understand how serious things have come for nurses to take this step. And I think it's also interesting that so many people in the audience have talked about morale and have talked about long-term causes. I mean, just even looking at the situation as an economist, you can see an enormous gap has opened up between the public what we all expect and demand of the NHS and what they can possibly deliver. And at a human level, that means every day, people, including probably people in this room, feeling they can't do their jobs. And you know, as Caroline says, they've come into nursing because they love their jobs. So I think there is a need for a more structural solution and a way to, I hope, a route to build goodwill, as we talk about goodwill, that isn't only about possibly a slightly higher pay rise, which we certainly can't afford a great deal more if we're not going to have inflation be embedded in the system, but also something that reassures people that we're going to give long-term workforce planning to fill these roles, because the people coming, they're still experiencing the COVID emergency, because all the people coming through the door, if you talk to nurses, on average, and doctors, on average, they're sicker because they've waited longer for care. So they actually need more people to look after them, and instead it's fewer. And 1 in 4 people, I really hope your daughter gets through the nursing training, because 1 in 4 are actually dropping out still. We haven't even addressed that. So I hope you could build goodwill around the table by showing you understood those long-term needs and not just talk about the pay rise, which is obviously going to be a big challenge.
Okay. I'm going to take another question, but before I do, I just want to tell you that next week we're in a beautiful place this week. We're also in a beautiful place next week. We're going to be in the lovely surroundings of Snape Maltings, which is close to the Suffolk coast, on a big day, of course, Budget Day, next Thursday. So we'll have lots to talk about. And the week after that, we're skipping off to the market town of Skipton in North Yorkshire, of course. If you'd like to be in our audience, go to our website and you can apply to do that. That's at bbc.co.uk/question time. And a list of all the venues where we're going to be will be there, so you can see if you'd like to be in the audience for any of the other programmes coming up. OK, let's take another question from Erica Pease.
How many insects need to be consumed before our politicians are held to a code of conduct fit for their positions?
And by the way, that is a fabulous hat you've got on there. I can't let that pass without comment. So, obviously you're referring to Matt Hancock, the previous Health Secretary, who's in the jungle at the moment. Are you casting your net wider there with that question? You seem to be.
That's the flippant end of the wedge. We could go for repeated allegations of bullying. We could go for security breaches. We could go for resigning and getting your job back a week later. None of it is behaviour that anybody in this audience would be allowed to get away with in an actual place of work. That there are employers out there that allow it is bad enough. That it's the government, I find unbelievable.
And I must admit, I'm not taking a judgment one way or the other on your question, but I've been doing this programme for 4 years, which I know is a blink of the eye compared to my illustrious predecessor, David Dimbleby. But this question keeps coming up and has only come up, I'd say, in the last few months. And it's not something I saw before. Make of that what you will. Emily.
I think the problem is, genuinely, I think the problem is that we've had one party who has been in power for 12 years, and they are just so complacent and think that power is theirs and they deserve it. And it doesn't matter what they do or how they behave, everything is okay, and they will just continue to rule. And I think that
Emily, I'll just point out, but hang on, well, you've got 14 MPs currently who are sitting as independents in the House of Commons, so they had the whip withdrawn. 6 are from Labour, 5 are from the Conservatives. So are you saying it's just a Conservative
and
problem?
what we do is, when people are on our side, we discipline them straight away. We chuck them out of the Labour Party. They're not allowed to sit as Labour MPs. We can't force by-elections, but we have disciplinary processes straight off. There is no excuses. Keir is very, very clear about this. He will not have any of it. We want to be able to show that there is a fresh start, that we can be a fresh start, and that we have different standards. And it's really important that we stick to it. It's really important. For the sake of democracy, people need to be able to believe in us and believe that we are there in order to be involved in public service. The Labour Party wants to have the opportunity to serve you. We need to be able to gain your trust. And the behaviour of this current government is such whereby people like you know, Erica, you say politicians. And that means me too, but I don't behave like that. You know, I mean, I think that's the problem, is that, you know, we all get tarred with that brush, and that's not right. You know, because I think that there are people who are called to public service, and they can either be nurses, some of them become politicians. And I appreciate that's a very old-fashioned way of looking at it. And actually, the modern way of looking at politicians is to laugh at us, you know, or to sneer at us. But actually, some of us are involved in politics in order to try and make the world better. And we're not there to feather our nests or to line our pockets or eat bugs or anything else, you know, just trying to make the world a better place and trying to do it through public service, you know, but we need to gain the public's... I'm sorry, I know, I appreciate I'm ranting, but I do feel very strongly about this. I feel very strongly that whenever we see this, it's yet another example and people will be thinking, ugh, politicians, you're all the same. And we're not. We're not.
Well, I think that the Hancock farce and the Williamson disgrace, which are just the 2 latest examples, are absolute symptoms of a rot at the heart of this Tory government. And I think that when you look at what we've had to live through over the past years, when we've seen a decade now of Tory infighting, 5 prime ministers, 7 chancellors, 6 home secretaries, 10 education secretaries, Gavin Williamson is apparently the 8th minister or whip to have resigned in this year alone. You know, if this was happening in a school, they'd be in special measures. If it was in a business, they'd be in administration. But instead, they're this rotten, rotten government that we have to put up with. So I think we should be putting them out of their misery, putting ourselves out of that misery too, and calling a general election right now.
And here in the white shirt.
For myself, whichever side of the political divide you fall, I noticed that each scandal, or whatever you want to call it, every time something comes out, the level of narcissism and self-interest of MPs at the moment is off the scale. They need to be looking after ourselves as constituents and people of the country, rather than looking after their own self-interest.
So when you hear Matt Hancock saying he's going into the jungle because he wants to show people there's a real him...
It's the same as what you hear from all politicians. Oh, this is the real me, that's the real me. It's all, I can't say the word, but we all know what we're thinking.
I mean, it was extraordinary that Matt Hancock said he had to go to the jungle in order to be able to make change happen. He's been the health secretary, for goodness sake. He could have made real change happen, instead of which he's now being held to account by Anton Deck, instead of being held to account by the COVID inquiry, which is where he should be, answering questions about the total mishandling of the COVID crisis.
I totally agree with what you're saying. I would like to see a general election, and let's see if whatever party comes in can do better. If they can't do better, we're in trouble.
Yeah, very true.
OK, the woman there in the pink stripy sweater. We'll just get a microphone to you. There you go. Yes.
Is the lack of ethics because there's no ethics minister or department, perhaps?
Yeah, there needs to be an independent...
Well, hang on. We've got let's ask the government, since they're in position. Are we going to see one at any time soon? We, of course, had Lord Geit.
Yes,
no longer?
No, the Prime Minister is going to appoint an ethics advisor. I mean, remember, he did only become Prime Minister a couple of weeks ago. And
things are happening very fast in your world, Mark.
And hadn't been expected.
All right, well, let's get to the question,
then. Let me deal with Erica's question. So, I think, look, the position is this. Being a Member of Parliament actually is a tremendous honour and privilege, you know, picking up on your point and the gentleman's here. And I think we should spend our time, particularly those of us that are lucky enough to be in government, spend our time not focused on ourselves, but focused on what we're trying to do for you. And you'll all have different views in this audience about how well we're doing.
This is not all just about Matt Hancock. I mean, so we've also had Gavin Williamson this week.
I'm trying to give a slightly wider answer rather than just delve straight into the slightly more flippant one. So look, that's what I think we should be doing. Now look, Matt Hancock, I don't think, should be going on a reality programme, particularly when Parliament is sitting. As a Member of Parliament, you should be doing your job in your constituency in the House of Commons. That's what the Conservative Party thinks, which is why he's had the whip taken away and he's not a Tory MP anymore. So he's an independent MP, because we don't think that is appropriate. And Gavin Williamson is no longer a member of the government because the Prime Minister made it clear that the things that he said were completely unacceptable. The Prime Minister hadn't... Yes, he did. The Prime Minister hadn't seen those specific comments when he appointed him. And in Parliament, PMQ'S yesterday... Prime Minister's questions. The Prime Minister said those comments were completely unacceptable and therefore it was right that Gavin Williamson left the government.
Can I ask you one thing which has emerged, which is also you were Chief Whip.
I was Chief Whip.
And Gavin Williamson was a Chief Whip. You were Chief Whip under David Cameron.
Correct.
So one thing that has emerged, or appears to have done, is Gavin Williamson's former deputy, Anne Milton, because she complained about him. And she said that when one MP was experiencing financial difficulties, Gavin Williamson waved a cheque under my nose. This is what she said, make sure you give him this cheque. He now knows I own him. And I just wondered, is it common that MPs get given a cheque from the Whip's office?
No, it absolutely is not.
And so is that irregular? Should that not have happened?
Well, look, all I can do is talk about when I was Chief Whip, that is not how I conducted myself. And actually, Erica's question...
But if you didn't do it, is this something that happens generally?
Not as far as I know. And something Erica said is very important. Before I was an MP, I'm a chartered accountant. I've got a professional background. I worked in a big company where we had standards, and I've tried to bring the things I learned in my professional life and how you conduct yourself into how I conduct myself as a Member of Parliament and as a Government Minister. And I think that's what Members of Parliament should do, and we should try and think about how our conduct looks to the public, when we're thinking about what we do. And I think if we did that, we would have higher standards. And I mean, I think, as Emily said, and you said, Fiona, there are problems on both sides of the House. There are MPs who make mistakes, and I think we should be held to a high standard.
Well, if you want to know what people are thinking, let's hear from the woman there in the pink top, I think, with the blonde hair. Yes.
Hello. Thank you. I'm really bored of hearing about the kind of low-level stuff that MPs are doing, like Matt Hancock being in the jungle. I just don't care. What I'm more concerned about is the fact that we have a Home Secretary who last week referred to refugees, people fleeing war, conflict, as an invasion. And I think it's really important to say that they are not illegal. Nobody is illegal. When they land on our shores, they claim asylum. There is no such thing. And actually, the things that your government are doing are a breach to the 1951 Refugee Convention and the 1948 Human Rights Declaration. I can't remember which one. One of those, we were a signing signatory, and it came after the horrors of the Holocaust. And the fact that we look at these people from Iraq, Eritrea, Albania, and just so we remember, 76% of claims end in a positive outcome, and a further 50% of the remainder also end in a positive outcome. We spend so much time talking about these people that quite frankly shouldn't be in their jobs, and it's a joke that they are. And we waste time talking about them rather than actually talking about the things that people in this government are doing that is harmful, stirring up, whipping up hatred. And that is what I'm really cross about. I don't care if Matt Hancock wants to do something. I couldn't care less. It's taking up pointless airtime. I'm repeating myself. What I really care about is the plight of refugees.
Don't worry about repeating yourself. We did talk about exactly that subject. Maybe you weren't watching. I perished the thought. But we certainly, you raise a very important subject, and we certainly have talked about it. I'm simply reflecting what we got, a lot of the interest we got from the audience tonight, but I totally hear what you're saying. The man there in the blue top, yes, with the glasses.
I'm glad you call him Gavin Williamson. What beggars belief, as far as I'm concerned, as somebody who's been sacked twice by previous Prime Minister, somebody who's accused of bullying...
Well, I think it's 3 times now.
3 times.
3 times, yeah.
I mean, accused of bullying, and yet he's a sir. I feel very sorry for the royal member of the royal family who has to put the sword either side of him when, somebody like that. And it's just the number... And there's Jake... What's he?
Merry.
Yeah, he's a sir now. What's he done?
Former party chairman.
The whole system, the honours system, is totally devalued
Then
by
you find that
what's
most of them
going
will
on.
go into the Lords very shortly as well.
Well, we'll find out. So, see, I was going to actually Stephanie, let me come to you. So, what Erica's saying, you put it, as you say, flippantly, but you're making a serious point. How many insects need to be consumed before our politicians are held to a code of conduct fit for their position?
Look, I do think, I agree with the woman who just spoke. There's a huge difference between Kevin Williamson and what he did and what some others have done in Parliament, and indeed the flaws of this current cabinet that we're sort of already seeing, and what Matt Hancock's done. And I'm also desperate not to talk about Matt Hancock. I just think he should, you know, if he does it, but to give him more and more attention just seems to be really counterproductive. But if we have another election and a fourth Prime Minister,
would you like to see another
6 months? I think globally, the financial markets would just completely give up on the UK altogether if we had 4 prime ministers and were not able to actually sustain for even a few months a single prime minister. So I don't think that's the immediate solution, but I think it is pretty clear, and it's something we've seen with both parties when they've been in power for a long time, that there's a malaise that sets in, there's a reduction in overall quality that has been exacerbated with the current situation and what happened with the sort of Truss fiasco, that this government, Rishi Sunak, trying to draw a line under it, bringing in a very able Chancellor and many other able members of the Cabinet. He didn't have that many people to choose from who didn't have baggage, who hadn't already failed in a number of other jobs. And he was also, in a 2-day period, pulling together a government at the same time as also having to do a lot of horse trading to prevent possibly Boris Johnson from entering the race. So I think it is what we see in Gavin Williamson.
About the complaints.
Yeah, what we see in that is a result of, it is a question of judgment, but I think it was judgment in a very short time, in a very dysfunctional situation, with potentially an ungovernable party in Parliament.
But it's also a sign of weakness. It's a sign of such weakness that you have to trade these people off, that you're prepared to have Suella Braverman, who has been a security risk. Gavin Williamson, not only has he been sacked, one of the reasons he was sacked was because he was briefing, he was a security risk. I mean, you're prepared to put these people into your cabinet, and then when you know that one of them is a bully, and yet somehow or other, you think it might be a good idea to have a bully boy on your side. Why is that? It's weakness again. It's because your party is so divided, you can't hold it together, and you put up with all kinds of bad behaviour, and frankly, they're letting us all down.
They are. And I've got to tell you, as a businessman, I'm sort of finished with politicians. Because
are you including the current, the present crop?
Because we've been living last.
You all seem to be getting on quite well in the green room beforehand, but are you including this lot as well?
Discussed it. But last 3 years, we've sat there, watched delusional people living on a different planet, believing anything they say, thinking that we're all stupid enough to believe it ourselves, and we're not that stupid, public. They've got very little or regulation whatsoever, and whatever regulation they did have, they tried to sweep away. And we're acting like a tin pot dictatorship, where everybody gets into Parliament, fills their boots, enjoys life, goes on to the House of Lords or a Job for Life or bank or something, and actually, they come first, their party comes second, and the nation has come a very poor third for the last few years. I'm not quite finished. And this is an opportunity now. Our third Prime Minister in this session of Parliament, this is our opportunity to try and put things right and get confidence. Alternatively, we're going to have to start...
Have another election. Get another government. That's what we need.
Both parties. Hold on. I'm not picking any party. I've been absolutely independent here. Will we then start asking for a political regulator to regulate politicians because they can't behave themselves? Do you know, if you're a director of a public company in the city, whatever you say, you've got to have verification for. You've got to verify. Otherwise, they grab you, throw you out. Politicians seem to be quite happy to go on news channels just spouting what they actually know is a damn right lie. And that has got to stop, and has got to stop now. This is our opportunity to get some stability back in the country and for it to try and rebuild, and then have an election on the right terms where people understand this is a serious job And we need serious people with ability to do the job for the nation.
Well, I'm just going to come back to you. I mean, Theo says that you're making the point about parties overall.
Yes.
But we've heard a lot of disillusionment from the audience here tonight. How are you going to convince people, the people here that you've heard, that actually you're not talking about third-rate politicians, whatever phrases you are using, corruption, call it what you like. How are you going to convince people this is going to be different?
Well, look, let me just try and do a bit of cross-party agreement here with what Emily said, which is the bit where she said she gets very cross when all politicians get tarred with the same brush. Most of the people I work with in Parliament are in politics for the right reasons. They're there to try and improve the country. And you won't all agree with them, and we all have different views. You know, on this panel, we don't all go about that in the same way, but we're all trying to do our best, and we're all trying to do it for the good of the country and put the country first, our constituents first, and our parties afterwards, and then us at the end.
So how are you going to persuade the people here that don't believe that?
I absolutely accept that's not what people think, and it's healthy people are sceptical. It's bad when they're cynical, and we have to work harder every single day, and I completely
But you've
accept
given
what
lots
Theo
of
said.
evidence to
The
think
Prime
like
Minister,
that, Mark.
No, one of the things the Prime Minister is going to try and do is to get back to governing in a calm, sensible way where people can see that even if they don't agree with the decisions, there's been thought and care, proper analysis in there, and that we're really trying to do the right thing. And we are going to have to there's going to be a considerable period of time between now and the next election where we do that day in and day out to persuade those people that feel let down, that they can trust us again. I absolutely accept that's a tough challenge, but that is one that we all have to
Why
be
don't we
up to.
just have an election? Can I just say, it's not going to happen simply by you saying you're going to try and persuade the public.
No, we've got
You've
to
got
show
to change.
them.
No,
We've got to
not
show
even
them.
just showing them. What you need to do is to make sure, for example, that there is a proper mechanism to hold ministers and indeed the Prime Minister to account. What we saw with the farce of Boris Johnson was that he was the judge and jury over whether or not he himself had broken the ministerial code. And that is just madness. This goes much deeper
But in the
than
end,
just
the system
individual
worked.
politicians.
He's not the Prime Minister anymore.
The
We've got a
system
new
certainly
Prime
did not
Minister.
work. The system was a nightmare. And if I can say as well that one of the problems here, I think, is to do with the voting system, because this first past the post gives some MPs very big majorities, and there is a very big crossover between MPs with large majorities and the MPs who are more complacent, who do less work, who can get away with more because they're not held to account by their constituents. So let's have a real overhaul now, not just tinkering about the edges of this. We have a bigger constitutional crisis. We need to have a fairer voting system. We need to get rid of the second chamber being just inherited. We need to have that through an election as well. We need to put democracy and transparency and accountability back into the heart of our political system.
I'm going to move on, but before I do, I just want to ask you, Mark, is this... Rishi Sunak stood in front of Downing Street and said he's going to have... be in charge of a government of integrity and transparency.
Professionalism and accountability.
The point that Caroline makes about the Prime Minister not being judge and jury when it comes to whether or not he or she has behaved according to the ministerial code, is that something that the Prime Minister is going to change?
No, because I think, in the end...
So he's going to keep the same system?
In the end, somebody has to be in charge, and in the end, the Prime Minister is the arbiter of the ministerial code.
We need an independent ethics advisor.
No, he's going to appoint one, but in the end, if it's about the Prime Minister has been elected, and I don't think you can have some civil servant passing judgment on who the Prime Minister should be. In the end, the decision about who the Prime Minister is going to be decided by the voters.
Not who it's going to be. I'm not suggesting that for a moment. What Caroline was saying was the Prime Minister has behaved...
We are going to have...
Sorry, I didn't hear what you said.
It was done by the MPs this time round.
Eventually.
Conservative membership.
It was done by the MPs, you're saying.
Well, yes, because
I think you should all wear a badge telling us who you're sponsored by.
I'm
like
not,
the late Robin Williams said.
I'm not sponsored by anyone.
You're either your lobby groups or your think tanks.
I'm not.
Who are paid?
Hang on, let him answer.
Hang on a minute. I'm not paid by anybody. I'm paid by the taxpayer
so who
to be the
funds
member of
your
Parliament.
Election campaign and your research?
Well, my researchers are paid for by the taxpayer. They work for me in Parliament. I don't take... I'm not paid for by anybody else, and as a minister, I'm not allowed to have outside interests.
So you don't have a second job?
Okay.
Or a
Well,
third
my
job?
only,
Or a fourth
my only
job?
second job is I'm
Like
Secretary of
Mr.
State for
Geoffrey
Transport,
Cox.
as well
hang on,
as
In the
being,
Bahamas?
as well as being the Member of Parliament for the Forest of Dean. And I work incredibly hard trying to do my best in the 2 weeks since I've been in this job to improve the transport system in the country. And I work for you, everyone in this room and everyone watching the programme.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, I
hang on.
absolutely do.
I'm really sorry. If you keep shouting, I won't be able to bring anyone else in. You've had your question answered, so I'm just going to move on. We're going to take another question on another subject. A lot of you asked about this, not surprisingly. Richard Ibrahim, where are you? There you are.
My question is COP27 realistic when the biggest emitters of CO2 simply aren't there?
So, COP obviously going on in Egypt at the moment, and Xi Jinping of China, that's the world's largest emitter of greenhouse gases. Xi Jinping is not attending. Narendra Modi of India, the third largest emitter, he is not attending. And, of course, Putin from Russia, the fourth largest emitter, he is not attending either. Caroline.
Well, Richard, I wish they were attending. I'm glad that our Prime Minister finally did his U-turn and did turn up. But essentially, I would argue that this COP process, hugely flawed though it is the only game in town when it comes to having a place where countries of the global south and countries of the global north can come together on some level of equality. That's certainly what the leaders of some of the countries from the south would tell you, that this is one of those places where they do have some leverage. But look, it couldn't be more important. We've just had the UN Secretary General saying in no uncertain terms that we are on a highway to climate hell and the foot is still on the accelerator. And we know that if you look at what governments are planning to do across the world, they're planning to produce more than twice the amount of fossil fuels that would be compatible with staying below 1.5 degrees. So it is massively important that there is an agreement at this COP27 meeting.
And how optimistic are you, Caroline? Because also we had COP26 last year, and lots of pledges were made. Few of those pledges have actually come to pass. So how optimistic are you feeling about this one?
I come back to my point to Richard in a way that it is the only game in town. I mean, there's plenty of reasons to be looking at why one would feel depressed. You're right. I mean, the UK as well. I mean, there's such a gap between what politicians are saying and what they're doing. So we had Rishi Sunak claiming that he's going to go faster, but yet what he's doing is green-lighting yet more oil and gas. He's refusing to rule out a new coal mine of all things. He's still going ahead with fossil fuel subsidies, even though that was meant to be ruled out at the last COP. So you can understand why there's so much disillusion with the process, but it is the only one we've got. And the bottom line is that we have to keep fossil fuels in the ground. The International Energy Agency is saying to us loudly and clearly that if we're serious about staying below 1.5, there can be no new exploration of more oil and gas. And that has got to be what the prize is at COP27, and it will require the richer countries to put some money on the table, because trust is at a premium, and many countries in the south don't have trust because so many of the richer countries, including ourselves, haven't been delivering on the financial pledges that we've been making. So I don't underestimate the huge task that is ahead of us. But there are also so many opportunities if we get this right. The number of green jobs, for example, that can be created if instead of chasing dreams of more nuclear power or yet more extraction of oil and gas from the North Sea, why don't we put that money into a real green transformation? The home insulation that we are crying out for, which would be the far quickest, cheapest, most effective way of getting energy bills down, rather than chasing after more gas, which is 9 times more expensive than renewables. So although we are at this critical moment, as the UN Secretary General says, there are also real opportunities to create better lives here for everybody. And that, I think, has got to be the spur going forward.
And Stephanie, what about the economics of this? Because, I mean, several years ago now, I think it was 2009, the developed countries pledged a certain amount to less developed countries to help them cope with climate change. I think it was 100 billion. That target still hasn't been met. And now there's talk about a number of mitigations. There's loss and damage. Some people are calling it reparations, which is money to give to countries to help them recover from the impacts already felt of climate change. Rishi Sunak has said that that's not something the government's going to be paying. That they will possibly be paying other things.
It is a hugely flawed process for all the reasons that we know. And just the institutions, the political institutions of each individual country that are represented or not represented at COP are probably none of them a match for the scale and the degree of the long-term nature of this challenge. You know, we've learnt that again and again in different countries. But I do think, I mean, I sort of agree with Caroline that we have to also look at the positive things that have come out of that flawed process, because it is partly the only game in town. And also some of the unexpected things, or at least positive things, that are coming out of the countries, even if China's not there, India's not there. In the US, you've had this ludicrously entitled Inflation Reduction Act, but it is actually largely about green jobs and the most important bit of environmental legislation that the US has seen in decades.
But we've got the UN saying there is no viable pathway now to keeping temperature
I
rise.
think there is a
to keeping temperatures below 1.5.
There is a realism around 1.5 degrees, but I think it's sort of odd to say. I mean, I think what's most corrosive in this, from any perspective, whether it's financial, economic, or social, is to give in to fatalism. Even if it is impossible to keep to 1.5, that makes it even more important to try and prevent further tipping points. And I would say, you know, the force of technology that we've seen and the amount of private finance that's gone into, for example, renewables, chasing the technological change that's happening before our eyes, really has produced a lot. I mean, the International Energy Agency this year showed that the increase in renewables coming on stream just this year is equal to the whole of the increase in power production, in electricity power production. If we get into that far faster than they expected, we're way ahead of schedule on that, then some of those we may not get 1.5, but at least at Bloomberg, those who know much more about this than me assure me we are also ruling out some of the worst case scenarios that used to be in that list.
The man there in the check shirt. Yes.
Yes. Quite frankly, this country, we do our bit for climate change. In the G20, we've cut emissions more than any other country. You know, that's the big countries in the world. We're doing our bit. But we can do more. We need to give more money to farmers, to do more environmental schemes, etc. Put more solar panels on roofs. There's loads of roofs, there are no solar panels, just whack them up. But we're doing our bit. We can do more, but we also need to bring the public with us to do more. But what's really damaging at the minute is nutters gluing themselves, well, they call themselves activists. I think they're just, something's going on in there. They're gluing themselves onto various motorways and climbing up gantries, but it's turning the public against it, and I'm seeing it, and you're just...
So you're talking about the Just Stop Oil protesters who...
I don't want to mention too much.
I don't know. I presume that's who you mean? Who've been on gantries on the M25?
Yeah, but they're turning... I feel like they're going to turn people against climate action. Because we are doing a lot in this country, but the public needs to be for it, and those people, they're just going to turn... You know, they're going to destroy it. I can just see it coming. The public, they're going to vote for some party that really doesn't want it, and it's just going to go up in flames. But they need to stop, and we need to do more, but we need to acknowledge that we are doing our bit and stop being so self-loathing, quite frankly.
Okay. The man there with the blonde hair and the black top.
I'm fairly certain Rishi Sunak mentioned that we need to focus on renewable energy to help inflation specifically. Do you think in COP there's any chance that he'll look into offshore wind farms at all?
Okay, well, Mark, you might as well answer that.
So,
offshore wind farms? I presume you mean onshore wind farms, because offshore he is supporting, but it's onshore ones that he's not.
Offshore, we put a huge amount of investment into that.
But you're against onshore
and actually, Caroline, you're against nuclear power, which is a low-carbon form of energy to do base load.
Which doesn't come fast enough.
Okay, but look, hang on. The clue's in the title of this programme, question time. The question from the young man, because actually what you meant was onshore, I think.
Yeah, sorry.
Yes, no, absolutely.
No, so we're prioritising offshore because we've driven down the costs there, exactly as you've said, to deal with the reduction in energy.
So no is the answer to that.
And then that gentleman's point over there about the protesters, I completely agree with him. They're causing an enormous amount of disruption to people trying to go about their lives. That's why last weekend I instructed National Highways to secure a High Court injunction. And this week, we've had a lot of success. The police have got faster at it during the week in terms of getting them off the gantries, getting the roads open again, because what they're arguing for is that the government should take this subject seriously, and we absolutely do. We are a leading country in the world at dealing with climate change. In my department, we've got ambitious plans to roll out electric vehicles, a charging network across the country, decarbonising our transport system, and we've actually made some commitments at COP this week with the US, for example, on trying to drive green technology into shipping.
But if you keep going on with more oil and gas, all of that doesn't matter, Mark. The bottom line is you've got to keep fossil fuels in the ground. That is what is leading to more and more emissions.
Gas is going to be a transition fuel through the 2030s, and getting oil and gas out of the North Sea and using that is actually much better for the environment than shipping it halfway around the world in shipping tankers. That is very environmentally damaging. Much better to use our own and not be beholden to dictators like Vladimir Putin.
May I just say this, because it's
really quick, because I must bring the rest of the panel in.
There is no guarantee that just because you get oil out of the North Sea, which is local, that it'll be used locally. It gets sold on international markets at global prices. Kwasi Kwarteng himself, when he was the energy minister, said, you know, these businesses are not charities. They will sell it to the highest bidder, and that might not be us. So there is no guarantee whatsoever, if you go around having massive amounts of yet more oil and gas coming from the North Sea, that actually gets used here and reduces our emissions here. So what we need to do is to make that green transition, to do it fast, because the bottom line is either we have a managed transition to a green transition and a greener future, or we have chaos. Those are the two choices before us.
Hang on, I must bring in the rest of the panel. So, Thea, Richard's question originally was, is COP27 realistic when the biggest emitters of CO2 simply aren't there?
We've only got one planet, we all share it. So we've got to start from somewhere. I mean, no one's talked about, we talked about Russia, but if we look at all the CO2 that's coming out of Ukraine with all the bombs and everything, I mean, what damage that actually is doing to the environment and accelerating. But the fact remains, what we can't have, and I use the word Muppets, and it's degrading in some ways, but funny in others. You can't have people causing the disruption.
Hang on, you were going to say Muppets, I think.
Muppets, yes, Muppets. Disruption to the economy of the country by chaining themselves to gantries on the M25, right, which causes even more congestion, and actually, like the gentleman said earlier, makes people turn against what is an incredibly serious point, because they think they're loony bins.
Well, no, so obviously we haven't got those particular protesters here, but one of the arguments they use is, unless they do something as dramatic as that, people aren't going to listen.
But it's not. It's, Laura, do you think people are really taking a message, or the biggest message that's coming out of it is congestion, upheaval, economic downturn? The reality, this is a democracy. We have so many opportunities, like Caroline has, to make our point in a democratic world.
I want those protesters out there, believe me. Peaceful protest is massively important, and it's hugely under attack by this government.
OK, hang on, I'm going to bring Emily in. Hang on. I need to bring Emily in, because Emily's not had a chance to ask this question.
I don't mind that. I don't mind it. And as long as it is peaceful, you consider it to be peaceful. But when policemen get injured, people get injured, drivers get injured, we have massive congestion on the road, inconvenience, people not be able to get to hospital appointments, running our lives. You consider the fallout damage peaceful. Well, why don't they just chain themselves to Westminster, where all you politicians sit, right, and get you guys that we're paying you to concentrate on doing your job properly, rather than inconveniencing the rest of the nation?
I have some sympathy with the idea.
That would be a really good idea.
I have some sympathy with the idea of focusing your protest where the decision makers are.
Okay.
But could I just quickly
No, I must bring Emily, or else Emily's not going to get a chance to answer this question before the programme ends. Emily.
Labour has a plan,
Caroline.
and Labour's plan includes onshore wind, and it includes nuclear. What it includes is borrowing to invest in a new way of doing things. Of course, you know, we cannot be responsible necessarily for the whole world, but what we can do as a country is show international leadership by doing things the right way. One country could win the race for making sure that we produce energy in renewable ways. Why couldn't it be us? Why can't it be us? Why can't we have the vision to be able to invest properly so that we can be carbon neutral by 2030? We can do it, so long as we believe that we can, so long as we stop the self-hatred, so long as we don't spend our time bickering and actually going, yeah, we've got to do it, let's go for it, and let's put some investment into the hundreds of thousands of jobs that can be created, the new industries that we can support, insulating people's homes. We won't be held to ransom by Putin anymore. We will be able to have cheap energy. We will be able to have good jobs. And do you know what? We'll also be doing our bit for saving the planet. That's the plan we need. We need to have the vision, and we need to be brave and bold about this, and we can do it.
Okay. Man there in the glasses with a pink tie.
Hi, I have to say I despair at this debate. I despair at all of the debates tonight because we're not talking about real people with real lives. We spent a debate talking about healthcare where we were talking about pay for nurses rather than care for patients. In the middle, we were talking about the activities of MPs talking among themselves instead of how their policies impact real people. And we're spending this debate talking about crazy protesters and politicians going off to echo chambers in Egypt about responding to the most dystopian visions of the planet instead of talking about the issues of the inhabitants.
Sorry, instead of talking about the issue of
people,
inhabitants. Sorry, I didn't hear
apologies, yeah, inhabitants of the planet. It's all crazy. Yeah. It's all so distant from ordinary people. And if we want to, we talk about a general election, whether it's tomorrow or in 2 years' time, people are going to turn away unless you actually talk about people.
Okay, I think nurses might take issue with the fact that they're not people and that what they're doing affects them, and patients. I mean, I think that is an issue that affects real people, and we've heard from nurses and people in the NHS.
And that's why the plan that we have is all about getting jobs, is about introducing industries into areas where the industries have gone. It's about making sure that we can put our bills down. I mean, this is the way in which we can rise to the challenge of climate change and change people's lives for the better.
I've got a couple of minutes. I'm going to bring you in, Stephanie. I just want to hear from the man here in the front with the poppy.
Yes, thanks for my question. But there needs to be some common sense added with like the environmental things on farming. Everyone here needs a farmer 3 times a day. You need to produce food locally. We need to produce it sustainably. And we're under this ludicrous idea that farms are being sold in Wales and Scotland and Ireland and England, and they're being planted with trees. They're being taken out of production. And then these assets are then sold is a carbon credit system so that polluters within London or internationally can then carry on polluting. You know, farming is 10% of our carbon output, yet we feed 65% of the population. There needs to be a more emphasis, I feel, on sustainable farming, local produced and seasonable. And it's not being taught. And we're seeing areas like in Wales, particularly, and in Scotland, where they're losing communities because farms are selling and you're planting pines. Yeah. There's no actual evidence, there's no real common sense being thrown at this discussion. And I don't see any leadership. You had Net Batters on here not that long ago saying...
He's head of the National Farmers Union.
Said food's really important. If you look at what the fertiliser productions, if you want to have organic farming in the world, a percentage is going to starve. That's fairly factual. With the fertiliser which isn't coming out of Russia and Ukraine and the Belarus, we're heading for a problem in the future.
Okay. Thank you for your point, Steph. I was going to try and bring you in. I'm afraid I've run out of time, so apologies. Our time is up. Thank you very much to the panel, to our audience here for all your contributions, and of course, thank you to you at home for watching from Question Time. Until next week. Bye-bye.
No, definitely clip that 2-minute rant that Leo did. That was interesting. Is it an interesting question sometimes? It was. Tories don't look like this. This has been getting bashed lately, honestly. And rightly so, they are shite. I don't know. Anyway, you're happy. Question time live. 10:40. Is it live? Of course it's live. I've been awake since yesterday. Didn't want to go to sleep. You lucky? I was going to go to sleep. Fucking question time. It's the same old bollocks anyway, innit? Good bollocks though. Especially on Twitter. You don't get a reply. I don't know why people use Twitter. It's so toxic. Twitter is like a giant mirror of cunts. Like, it's a mirror that says everyone's a cunt. And it's social media in a nutshell, isn't it? Social media is the giant mirror of reality of humans. Humans get upset that other humans exist. Well, what do you expect when you give every human the possibility to call every other human a cunt? What do you think is going to happen next? I mean, I'll tell you, when I first used the internet, about 15, it's on a 5.6 kilobit per second modem. It's really 5.6 kilobits per second. Pretty slow. She cost me about £1 to see a pair of tits. Anyway. Point being is, there was only nerds on the internet when I used it. People who watched porn and gamers. That was it. And some of the freaks, but they didn't count. It's mostly gamers and people who watch porn. And then Mark Zuckerberg and other fucking weird people came about and gave people egos. Oh look, I'm important. I exist. Do you want to see what I had for dinner? No. It's a thing. You can just be you and then get clicks for self-gratitude. Can I get paid for doing that? Yep. What? I can get paid to just like exist. Yeah. If you got nice tits or a quirky thing about you, we'll give you money. Okay. Just saying. I mean, the fact that one of our MPs went on a reality TV show. I mean, the fact that it's called a reality TV show is mad anyway. Because it started in the 90s with MTV. Don't know if you know that. But reality TV started with Sky. Not Sky. Yeah, Sky. Rupert Murdoch's Sky in England or the United Kingdom, per se. It was MTV. If anybody knows Sky, when you only had 16 channels back in the day. 16. Woo! So many channels and 4 of them were porn. Stopped at 12. And number 1 was Sky 1. How much that? You just had to swap over to watch the BBC. Didn't even have BBC on Sky. Anywho, point being is, it's mad the way the internet has changed people's perception of reality. It's fucking crazy. Like, if you watch anything on the internet now, it's like valid or some shit. And it's self-validation from all the clicks. Are you good looking? I'm good looking. There you go, good looking. Now everybody thinks you're good looking, so therefore I'm good looking. Or whatever. Inverted commas, full criteria. It's bonkers. And like, people are like, how did America vote for Donald Trump? That's always been there. It's just never had the opportunity to like congregate, I suppose. Like the Tories. I mean, the British people have been so fucking enamoured with the right wing press. They call the left in this country far left. I mean, have you looked at the front bench of the Labour Party? Any of them far left? I mean, when we did get someone who's to the left, far left, you would say, which is a bit mad. Which is, Jeremy Corbyn. The fucking nation had a meltdown. Like, literally had a meltdown. But oh, rude today. Yeah, because he's a socialist. I mean, the paper's called Ed Miliband Red Ed. They couldn't call him a fucking Jew hater because he is Jewish. So they called him Red Ed. And nobody remember that in the papers? Red Ed. Yeah, that was mad, wasn't it? See, I've been swimming politics for a long ass time. I was born in the 80s, man. I remember Margaret Thatcher. She took away my milk. Motherfucking bitch. So I know. And this shit's mad. Just watching people like get deformed on Twitter and all this shit. They don't even know what neoliberalism, how economics works. This whole inflation shit. It's mad the way the Tories just cost us 50 billion quid and they're going to go, oh, the taxpayer's going to pay for it. Well, because you tried to fucking borrow it for your mates. Try to make us pay for their tax cuts. Funny. Both. Yeah, get the plebs to work more and have babies. We'll import the fucking rest. You see the point? Liz Truss was saying, yeah, let's import the fucking labour. I mean, to be fair, we do anyway. That's called pensions, if you don't know. But it's mad the way, like, they think trickle-down economics is a thing. I mean, it is, right? If you live in the medieval times. But I think people are getting fed up with this whole with the plebs. And you've seen it, they're coming out with mad shit like voting patterns and whatever. I don't think Scotland's going to be a part of the Union next year in 2023. They're going to vote to leave, finally. That's going to be a mad one. Whole country's going to shit, man. And you can't get rid of the Tories. Oh, it's the party rules. Fuck off. Like, it's like Zimbabwe. Like, what the fuck? Party rules just means you have 4 prime ministers in the space of what, fucking 10 months or some stupid shit. It's a fucking joke. Like, honestly. Like, fucking 10 old white people and one, in fact, no, 4 white people, 1 Asian doctor voted for Liz Truss in a secret room. Like, what the fuck? And then we got Rishi Sunak. Everybody has to kiss his ass and go, he's the first fucking Asian. Whoop de fucking do. Like, Americans gave a fuck about Obama. I mean, oh, it's nice. What? Because you're accepting the fact that you're fucking racist. Oh, let's just admit our history's shitty as human beings. So therefore we have to clap when anybody achieves something that's fucking normal anyway. Well, you're black. You managed to be a politician. Fucking what do you fucking do? How many shitty black politicians exist in the world? No one mentions them. You know. There's loads of shitty black people in the world who are fucking in power. But just because one black guy managed to do it in a white country, we should fucking, start clapping. People are pathetic. Like, really. Bit of a fucking joke when you think about it. Anyway, ramble. I think I might do some shorts, though, because I think shorts is a good idea. I don't know about politics now, though. Only the zingers. I just call it zingers. Or whatever. I think I'll call it question time zingers. Or some shit. Because you don't really get on politics now, so. But if there's one, I'll add it, I guess. But I'm gonna do that one later. When I finish playing Bannerlords. I might play Counter-Strike actually. I don't know. But that one looked pretty good though. This little rant about how the Tories are full of shit and they're all liars. Well, to be fair, he did say all politicians are liars, which is true. But I think it's the Americanization of England or the United Kingdom. Like, everyone thinks we need to be American. Like, Donald Trump is not new. And there's a lot of, like, English people are like, yeah, Donald Trump. And I'm like, are you fucking mad? You can go, well, Ronald Reagan was an actor or a celebrity. Yeah. And he got shot. Just, he literally got shot. When was the last time anybody in the Western world got shot? I'm not saying that they should be shot, but I'm just saying, when was the last time? Apart from an MP, I guess. Well, MP, I mean, okay, so a few days ago in Pakistan, that other guy got shot, didn't he? But I thought he'd get blown up, to be fair. Shooting someone in Pakistan seems pretty low key. I think like he'd blow them up or whatever. Shite. Don't know why I'm laughing, but I am. I don't know. I just like the fact that Question Time's back. I'm back. You know how many subs I used to have? 5,000, 7, 5. I think it was 5.7. I had a fight with YouTube. I was trying to play a banking documentary. I had a fight with the YouTube bot. They wouldn't let me play it. So I deleted my channel. Motherfucker. Anyway. But yeah, there you go. There's your politics for today, I suppose. Now you can go and all tweet about it. If Elon Musk hasn't made you pay £8 or whatever it is, $8. I don't even know what Twitter's. I don't really care. I don't think it's Western civilization. I just think the whole entire human race is psychotic. You got people who think there's a magic dude in the sky. You got people fighting about resources, basically fighting about peanuts and shit. Like, the human race is the most selfish, egotistical bunch of weirdos ever. Like, just look at the facts, bro. We We don't even know how we got here. We don't know who built the pyramids. People say the Egyptians, but whatever. Okay, let's say the Egyptians built the pyramids. Let's say that was a thing. We're still shit then, aren't we? They built them like 6,000 years ago. When was the last time you've seen anybody build a pyramid? A proper one? Just for shits and giggles. Elon Musk has got a billion. He can't even... Well, to be fair, he puts rockets in space. That's different. But he still doesn't build a pyramid. With copper tools, might I add. Yeah, I'm saying. It's a bit strange. The world is a very strange place. You shouldn't take it too serious, that's all I'm saying. Because these politicians are full of shit. But I'm going to just declare my interest. I'm the king of Liverpool and Wales. So, you know, just saying. You do you, I'll do me. You're all blessed in my kingdom. Or whatever. Anyway, I'm going now. I'm going to go and play Bannerlords. In fact, I'm not. I'm going to watch Andor episode 10. Spoiler alert. Episode 10. See you on Sunday. Sunday. With Laura Koonsberg. Sorry, cunt. Get banned for that on Twitter. Tickety boo. 900 million quid. Yo, Boris Johnson borrowed 600 billion. I just want you to remember that. Boris Johnson borrowed just over £500 billion just before COVID. I can show you the actual evidence for that. Because it's literally in a budget. 3 years ago, we borrowed £500 billion. And then COVID happened.